Our agenda today, this webinar is going to present Aquatic Invasive Species, AIS, information for those that are involved with water quality monitoring activities, especially those concentrating, focusing on fresh water. There's a lot of AIS issues for marine and estuarine water bodies, but because the focus of swamp has been largely fresh water, and that's what a lot of the citizen groups are working in, that's what our focus will be through this presentation. We'll be discussing what are AIS, the harm these agents can cause, prevention planning, HACCPs, an introduction to those. We'll go over some profiles of AIS species of interest and provide some examples for decontamination. And then also throughout the presentation, we'll have some useful web-based resources, and if time at the end, we'll run through a couple of those resources as well. To begin with, what are aquatic invasive species? AIS are plants, animals, or disease agents with respect to a particular ecosystem that is not found in the ecosystem and whose presence in the environment causes economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. Now, this definition is based on the Invasive Species Laws and Regulations, Executive Order 13112, which was signed by the President of the United States. AIS are also known by lots of different names. They've been called exotic species, alien species, invasive organisms, noxious species, naturalized species. The list goes on and on. So when we talk about AIS, those are the guys that we're discussing. They also have some other definitions. Within the California Food and Agricultural Code, the word pest has very specific meanings. Pest, if you look at what we have online here, and the CFA code 12754.5, pest is those organisms that are liable to become dangerous or detrimental to the agricultural or non-agricultural environment of the state. And they can be insects, predatory animals, rodents, nematodes, weeds, or they can be other organisms, terrestrial, aquatic, aerial plant, or animal, virus, fungus, bacteria, or microorganisms. And then within the federal code, Title 40, Protection of the Environment, 152.5, pests are defined as organisms which are declared to be a pest under circumstances that make it deleterious to man or the environment. So we have some legal definitions for pests, which sometimes are aquatic invasive species. We have some additional regulations that also affect aquatic invasive species. Within the State Water Resources Control Board, they set water quality objectives, and those are found within the water quality control plans. Each regional water quality control board has a plan. We often refer to those as basin plans. But we also have an ocean plan and a delta plan. And within those, we could actually set a water quality objective concerning exotic species. The 303D list is the impaired bodies list. It's a section in the Clean Water Act. When the list was updated in 2006, 24 water bodies in California were listed due to the impairment of the water body by exotic species. And California is not alone. Other states have listed impaired water bodies because of aquatic invasive species. And I cited there a case study which was published by the Environmental Law Institute, and it had seven different states, 7 different case studies. Once we have a water body in a 303D list, eventually we may have to put together a total maximum daily load to regulate and control those species, come up with a level that would be acceptable. That could be some, that could be none. It just depends on the process of that TMDL and what they're trying to control. The Department of Fish and Game also has rules and regulations that can affect AIS. Species can be listed as prohibited. Chlorpetaxifolia, quagga mussel, zebra mussel, those are all species that are prohibited to possess, release, or transfer. We can find these rules and regulations in the Fish and Game Code, as well as in the California Code of Regulations, Title 14. Department of Food and Ag also declares weeds as being noxious, and that's a list that is shared with the feds. Plants that we do not want to see in California and those that we know are a big problem and are directing resources to eliminate. If you'd like some more information, you can go to the USDA Ag Library. They have a section on public laws and acts, and there are many, many, many laws that have been passed addressing AIS, some very specific for tamarisk or rundo or some other organism that's been released into the environment. Why all the hubbub? Why the big concern and all the legislation, the rules, the activity for aquatic invasive species? And it's because of the impacts that they have. The effects of invasive species can be seen in declining wildlife and plant populations, and loss of economically important resources, and even impacts to human health. Just to go over some of those impacts to the ecology, over 40% of the species listed as threatened or endangered are at risk in part or due to invasive species. Many of these invasive species do not have predators, and their populations go unchecked, and they expand and they begin to overtake native species and degrade habitat. The National Wildlife Refuges are seeing invasive species as the single greatest threat because they cause widespread habitat degradation on their properties, and they're observing competition with native species, which are contributing to declines of these trust species. Places where we've seen invasions of Asian clam and zebra mussel, there's been an elimination or degradation of plankton by those non-native bivalves, so they're changing the entire food chain. Diseases have been running through the environment like chytrid fungus, which has led to the decline or extinction of some frog populations. AIS plants such as purple loosestrife, phragmites, water hyacinth, they've overtaken wetlands and result in a loss of biological diversity as well. Now, some of the impacts AIS have towards hydrology and habitat are really broad and can overlap with some of the ecology issues. Some of these species are able to have very direct and significant effects on water quality as well. And the ways that they do this are varied. We have non-native grasses that are really shallow rooted. When the rains come, those plants don't hold, and it promotes erosion because they cannot retain the structure and integrity of the plant-soil interface. And so we have soils just slipping away with the grass on top of them. We have burrowing animals that are causing bank failure and levees to fail. European green crab is one that we've noticed on the west coast causing significant problems. Aquatic weeds can also reduce dissolved oxygen levels. Certain plants have been documented to change nitrogen levels in the soil. Some of our plants are creating different fire regimes. Instead of a 100-year burn cycle, it's changed things to a 20-year cycle. So again, that promotes erosion and creates a burden on our watersheds. Tamarisk has been shown to consume just a lot of water. When the tamarisk is removed, we see water levels rising in some water bodies. Those can be creeks, rivers, and especially ponded environments. Didymosphena gymnata has silica stalks that remain in place after the organism dies. These stalks can trap sediment, which increases embeddedness of the stream. So there's lots of things that can go on with AIS that really drastically change what's going on in our various water bodies throughout the state of California. These organisms can also impact human health. Now, West Nile virus is an invasive species transmitted by mosquitoes, and it's caused a lot of harm. In 2002, they tallied up over 16,000 birds, 14,000 horses killed by this virus. It also resulted in nearly 3,000 human encephalitis cases, and it did result in a documented 284 human deaths. Some aquatic invasive plants, such as wild parsnip and nettle, and we do have exotic nettles that cause skin lesions and rashes, and the dinoflagellate Pfiesteria can cause memory loss, confusion, skin irritation, respiratory irritation, and also gastrointestinal complaints. Now, the impacts are varied. It's the environment, it's to wildlife, and it's to human health, as well as our pocketbooks. Financially, aquatic invasive species and invasive species in general bring up a large bill. In a recent study, was shown that total use and indirect use impacts by invasive species within the United States cost $143 billion annually. A previous study done in 2000 estimated that the associated costs in the U.S. due to invasive species was around $137 billion. Prior to that, was looking at a period of 1906 to 1991, just at 79 exotic species, that $97 billion in damage occurred. So through time, we're seeing the impacts financially of invasive species increasing. It's due to many different factors. It's control, reduction, elimination programs, detection. Aquatic invasive species are causing impacts into boating and waterways, swimming areas, and so those organisms need to be removed. We also have impacts to our drinking water infrastructure. Zebra and quagga mussels can impact the delivery mechanisms, clogged pipes, grates, and to do maintenance, drawdowns will occur. And those are all additional impacts. Exotic species, if you take a look at how they would impact agriculture, the costs get passed on to the consumer. And so when we take a look at aquatic invasive species, the damage to the environment provides a lot of beneficial services. And when those services are impacted, we have to do something else in order to recover those uses. And it's either going to be removing those species or coming up with other management practices. And that's always going to cost money. It's not just a concern for the U.S. or North America. It's really a global problem. And there's two different websites that you can take a look at for information on a global scale. We need to share information. What we have as an invasive species may be an invasive species somewhere else, or maybe a native species somewhere that here's a problem and we can share general ecology information. The International Union for the Concern of Nature has a special invasive species group, and they're working to reduce threats to natural ecosystems. by increasing awareness of invasive alien species and sharing ways to prevent, control, or eradicate those organisms. The Global Invasive Species Program is very similar. It's an international partnership of scientists dedicated to addressing the global threat of invasive species. Their most recent conference was in China. We can look to these scientists and organizations for lots of information, as well as just seeing how they're going about conducting business and doing outreach and education. Within North America, one of the largest initiatives was the 100th Meridian Initiative. It was a cooperative effort between state, provincial, and federal agencies to prevent the west spread, beyond the 100th meridian, of zebra mussels and other aquatic nuisance species. Quagga mussels are in California. It took a while for them to get here, in part because of the effectiveness of the 100th Meridian Initiative. To keep it strong is to work with the rest of our North American partners so that we can limit the westward expansion of aquatic nuisance species that may arise in the East Coast or in the Great Lakes region. The Commission for Environmental Cooperation's Closing the Pathways of Aquatic Invasive Species Across North America is seeking to protect North America's marine and aquatic ecosystems from the effects of aquatic species. This initiative will assist the development of a North American approach to prevent and control, which is aimed at eliminating the pathways for the introduction of invasive species along coastal and fresh waters of Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Within Western United States, we also have some programs. The West Coast Ballast Outreach Project is huge, and they're working to collaborate with partnering organizations throughout the West Coast and Pacific Basin to develop outreach programs and all kinds of different tools to manage aquatic invasive species that travel through ballast water. And the Western Regional Panel on Aquatic Nuisance Species is a wonderful opportunity to protect financial and ecological resources from invasive nuisance species. They have several different programs already in place, some in North Dakota, Guam, Alaska, California. And these are to ensure that the introduction and spread of these organisms and their impacts are limited. So it's trying to put the lid on everything. So it's a large, aggressive program that's enabling others throughout the western states to do aquatic invasive species control and eradication. Specifically in California, we have many, many different programs. The Invasive Species Council of California was recently established. This represents the highest level of leadership and authority in state government regarding invasive species. This council was initiated by the governor's office. The ISSC is an interagency council that helps coordinate and ensure complementary, cost-effective, environmentally sound, and effective state activities regarding invasive species, and this is across all state agencies. Many state agencies are impacted by aquatic invasive species. Not just the water boards, fish and game, harbors and boating ways, it's state lands and many, many other agencies. California Invasive Species Advisory Committee is the advisor group to the ISSC. They're developing recommendations, providing advice based on input and cooperation from many stakeholders throughout California. One of the state programs that I like to highlight is the Department of Fish and Game's Invasive Species Program. Their mission is to reduce the negative effects of non-native invasive species on the wildlands and waterways of California. The Department of Fish and Game also has a marine program through OSPR. and you can find a wonderful database on marine exotic species that have been detected in California. The program was supposed to go away, but that sunset was removed, and so the program's going to be ongoing. So Department of Fish and Game has some great programs, freshwater and marine. The State Lands Commission also has a marine invasive species program. It's charged with preventing or minimizing the introduction of non-indigenous species to California waters from commercial vessels. The ballast water from commercial vessels coming up from overseas has been just a huge vector and one of the primary sources of exotic species to San Francisco Bay and to Los Angeles, LA Harbor. But ballast isn't the only source of invasion. We have many, many, many vectors in California. It's boats and trailers, wheeled vehicles, recreational vehicles and trucks that go through streams, airplanes going from one part of the nation, one part of California, or even another part of the world coming into California can bring in invasive species. Cargo and mail, the things that are being shipped around, can harbor invasive species. Water diversions, aerial deposition during firefights, fishing equipment, hiking boots, livestock, your pets, bait. All of these things are vectors of invasion, including water quality monitors. IS prevention outreach has been pretty broad, pretty wide throughout California for a lot of different things. Trying to stop aquatic hitchhikers on boats, trying to address chytrid and frogs, seaweeds, educating people about what to do with pets that they no longer want, so that they don't release them into the environment. This has been more or less for the general public, not so much for professionals. So this presentation is to you, the professionals and the non-paid professionals or citizen monitors, so that you can have a little bit more information about aquatic invasive species. Often I get asked, where are these, what are they, and what do I have to know, and what do I have to do? And that's the question that I generally can't answer. There's just too many factors involved. I can help people begin to answer those questions. But due to the nature and the lack of data regarding aquatic invasive species, we just don't know who's there and when they're there. Usually when we find these organisms, they're there, and it's because there's a lot of them, we can find them. So if you go to a water body, we should assume that something's there. We shouldn't always treat things as if they're clean. We really don't have any ongoing detection programs. Now, within California, agricultural-wise, they do a lot of checking. They put out lots of traps. They really want to find out what kind of insects and other pests are coming into the state of California. Within LA County, they find several of these organisms every year. And that's just here with a program that's looking. We don't have that when it comes to our surface waters. It's a little bit difficult on who's there and what's there, what kind of species present. If we take a look at the ecology of organisms, they change. We can't always predict what's going to be the next aquatic invasive species. Two of the oddest ones is Chlorpa taxifolia and Didymo. Chlorpa is a tropical seaweed. It was used extensively in the aquarium trade, pets and public aquariums. It was accidentally released into the Mediterranean. The assumption was, since it was a tropical species, that during the winter it would die. Well, the species underwent some kind of mutation while it was in captivity, and it didn't die during the wintertime. And so now Chlorpa taxifolia is throughout the Mediterranean, causing a huge, huge problem, seriously degrading the environment and also causing harm to various fishing activities, as well as some human health issues because it is toxic. And Didymospina gymnata, or Didymo, it was found in Arctic waters that were nutrient poor. But where it's a problem invasive, it's outside that Arctic circle in nutrient-rich waters that are warm. So things go wild, things go crazy, and the list of aquatic invasive species continues to grow, unfortunately. Where you can get some information, aquatic invasive species maps, query tools, and reporting tools can be found at Citizen Science or citsci.org. This is a site that allows citizens, school groups, and professionals, and some states are using this, to enter invasive species observations. USGS also has a wonderful search tool. You can put in the organism of interest, the state, or a drainage area using a hydrologic unit code and find out who's been reported present. And you can also get information on the ecology of the organism and a good description of what the organism looks like. Montana State University has a map solely for New Zealand mud snail infested areas. California Department of Fish and Game Invasive Species Program has 2 products that can be looked at. There's a map of quagga and zebra mussel infested areas in California, and they also want to find out if you've seen these species, and so you can report to them. And the United States Geological Survey also has a sighting report form, but I really think that the others have much better querying tools than USGS at present. For links for these, you can go to the Swamp IS web pages. So now we're just going to go through some profiles of these agents causing problems. What are these aquatic invasive species? The Chytrid fungus, BD, it travels easily through the water and damp materials. It's on the amphibians. We can get it on our waders when we're working in infected areas. It causes many different disorders to the epidermis. It reduces the ability of the frogs to right themselves when they get flipped over, and it leads to death. It's very, very quick, and it's caused the elimination of frogs at a global scale. We have many fish diseases that are caused by aquatic invasive species. 3 big ones that I'm going to mention for California are whirling disease, Ceratomixa, and viral hemorrhagic septicemia. Whirling disease is a parasitic infection. It damages the cartilage, causes young fish to die sometimes. It can also cause infected fish to swim in an uncontrollable whirling motion. When an infected fish dies, millions and millions of these indestructible spores can be released, and they can lie dormant for up to 30 years. So we have had areas where trout have expressed symptoms of whirling disease, and so we have to treat those waters as being potential sources of whirling disease for quite a long time. California, the species that are most infected are rainbow trout and cutthroat, but all salmonid species are vulnerable. Within the Klamath River, we've had recently a loss of Chinook salmon by Ceratomixa. It causes internal infections, entire digestive tract, affects the liver, gall, bladder, kidney, heart, gills, and muscle tissues. Within the Klamath, they're seeing this being linked to a worm host. So they'd be able to see the organism affecting various salmonids, especially the Chinook. But this trying to control is going to be a very big issue. So we really have to be careful when we're working in those areas and clean our equipment effectively. Move on to Didymo, also known as rock snot. Now this is a diatom that creates a silica stalk, and it smothers the stream beds with mats as thick as 8 inches and can ruin just about any creek or river. Become a big, big issue in New Zealand, but we do have it in California. That picture that's labeled Figure 8, that's from California. It was taken in the mid-90s, but in the early 90s, Didymo was seen to be a problem already, and this was at a water supply canal near Donner Pass. Hopefully, we won't be spreading this organism around. It has not been removed from that water body. We do have aquatic invasive species that are terrestrial plants. These are plants that affect wetlands and have an effect on riparian areas as well. Perennial pepperweed is a big one. It invades wetland perimeters, riparian areas, salt marshes. It interferes with the regeneration of cottonwoods and willows. We can have an entire shift in the flora on certain sites. Cheatgrass has just been a bane in western U.S. It's increased the occurrence of fires from a 60 to 110-year frequency to just 3 or 5 years. We're having just a huge increase then in silt that's being released into our watersheds due to fire. Then our favorite one to hate, the giant reed, the rundo. It chokes rivers, moves water, degrades habitat, and not much of our native wildlife gets any benefit from it. Freshwater aquatic plants that are invasive within California, Eurasian water milfoil. It's a submerged rooted perennial plant. That little piece of it, if they get caught in your sampling gear, your boat, can be transported to other places. Rapid colonization can result. We don't want to be moving this organism around. Parrot feather is another ornamental aquatic plant that's escaped cultivation, and it's found throughout the Central Valley and in Southern California. And it forms extremely dense mats that shade out other aquatic invasive plants, inhibits water flow, as well as blocking migration of fish. Smooth cordgrass is a species that we're trying to watch throughout all of our coastal estuaries. It's a non-native cordgrass that's invading out from where our native cordgrass is and turning what had been mudflats into grassland areas. So we're losing mudflats, which are critical for migratory birds. We even have zooplankton species of concern. Some aquatic invasive species listed here, just two of the many. The first one is found in Washington right now, and it's present in increasing numbers, but they're really not sure what's happening as far as the ecological effects and how it fits in with the present food chain. Spiny and fishhook water fleas are right now inside the Great Lakes region. They have extremely high reproductive rates and can build a very large population in an extremely short period of time, and they feed on other zooplankton. So managers and scientists are worried that these populations can lead to the depletion of zooplankton in certain water bodies. New Zealand mud snails often reach densities greater than 100,000 in a square meter. They can just cover the entire surface of our cobble and our stream beds, just pushing out any other benthic invertebrates. These are easily transported. The image there on the right, that's of a wading boot, and those are the mud snails, adult reproductive mud snails that are attached to it. It only takes one mud snail to make a population. They carry the eggs already fertilized. One organism can start a population. We also have some other mollusks of issue, Eurasian mussels and the Asian clam. Zebra mussels and quagga mussels are something that's been a huge threat, and they're present here in California already. They can just coat surfaces and decrease zooplankton, which causes a huge shift in native species and a disruption of the ecological balance of the water body. Asian clams, kind of similar. They're filter feeders that remove particles from the water column so they can reduce plankton that's available to natives, but also their bodies are accumulating on the shores, causing a change in the type of material that's in the habitat. So instead of just having a sand substructure, you have sand and shells from these clams. They've also been found clogging up irrigation canals, pipes, and drinking water supplies. So what can we do about all these problems that we have? Well, prevention is the best way to do it. It's our first line of defense against aquatic invasive species. After prevention, it's control, exclusion, and eradication. But we're going to focus on prevention because we may be potential vectors. The tool that I'd like to introduce to you is HACCP. HACCP is the Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point. We can use HACCPs for each of our programs so that we can identify how we may be a potential vector and reduce the potential or eliminate those activities which are the strongest having policies and procedures in place to deal with these are critical. It needs to be a robust policy, adaptive program for all of your monitoring activities, and you need to have records indicating that all of your procedures are being followed. And you can verify these policies and all the work that's being done and share them with others. And that's through this HACCP approach. It's preventative. It's not reactionary. It concentrates on the points in the processes that are critical to the safety of our waters. It stresses communication, but again, it's not zero risk. It minimizes risk. Even though you may implement a HACCP, it may still be a vector. There are 7 basic principles to HACCP. It's conducting hazard analysis. It's identifying critical control points, establishing control measures to reduce exposure, and monitoring each of those critical control points. Then establishing correction action when a problem occurs, when you see that you're not having effective control. Verify that the HACCP plan and control measures are working and documenting that through a record-keeping system. A lot of information can be found through Sea Grant and Fish and Wildlife Service. These slides are taken from Sea Grant, Great Lakes region, from their training curricula. Potential hazards. Aquatic invasive species are 4 different categories when it comes to HACCP. Fish invertebrates, such as exotic gobies. Vertebrates. Plants, and this is aquatic plants, algae, diatoms, and then species, identifying which of these are potential hazards for the work sites that you're in. The first step is to put together a project information sheet. This is really simple. It's just what kind of work are you doing and where are you doing it at? Next step is to develop a flow chart of your activities. What are you doing? How are you preparing for your equipment and your gear? How are you getting on site? What are you doing on site? How are you leaving that location? And then where are you going next? And just laying all these things out with the actions that are being done through your monitoring activities. Step 3 is to complete a hazard analysis worksheet. This is fairly simple. It's listing your activities, the hazards that it's addressing or may have an impact due to your presence. What can you actually pick up and transmit during your next activity? Is it significant or not? Then why? And then what can you do to reduce being a vector? And is this step critical? Is this a critical control point, yes or no? And just to emphasize, what is a critical control point? It's a point, step, or procedure at which controls can be applied and aquatic invasive species hazard could be prevented, eliminated, or reduced to acceptable levels. An example would be if I am working in a water body that I know has New Zealand mud snail, I can dedicate gear towards that particular water body that goes nowhere else. So I'm limiting the exposure of my gear. I'm going to treat my gear, but I'm never going to use that gear anywhere else. So that's one of the ways I'm going to address that critical control point plan. Step 4, just filling out the entire plan form. So you have your critical control point, significant hazards, the limits for each control measure, and then you have to do monitoring to make sure that these things are effective. If they're not, what kind of corrective actions are going to be taken? Write everything down. Keep diligent records. Types of records that you want to maintain are checklists of the actions that were done during each activity day. And all of your field staff that have been trained on aquatic invasive species and your HACCP activities and plans. Also, update your HACCP. These are living documents. Whenever you have new equipment, new staff, or adopting a new decontamination procedure, or when new threats emerge, update your HACCP. You want to make it as current as possible. Now, we're just going to go over some decontamination processes, but I want to have a few definitions up front. Hygiene refers to a set of practices associated with preservation of health. We are taking those activities to preserve the health of various wildlife species as well as the overall ecological health of our water bodies. Cleaning is just the removal of dirt and debris from our equipment and from ourselves. Disinfecting is cleaning an article of some or all of the pathogenic organisms which may cause disease, and sterilize is using a process to effectively kill or eliminate transmissible agents, fungal spores, bacteria, viruses, and such from equipment. The type of gear that you need to have on hand when you do your monitoring activities: containers for storing things in and for soaking your gear in, brushes for scrubbing, having some weights. If you're going to be submerging waders, they like to float, so you want to have your waders submerged, so you can put a weight on top of them to keep them in the water. Have personal protective equipment and your MSDS sheets to keep your staff and your field people safe. Also, whichever decontamination chemicals you're going to be using, keep those safe, waterproof containers. And you can also use dry bags for soaking your gear in, and especially if you're moving from one site to another and you want to continually soak your gear while you're driving, dry bags work really, really well. But whatever we do, method-wise, we're always going to clean our gear, removing mud, debris, plants, seeds. It's from our vehicles, our waders, all of our field gear. Now, one of the first treatments that we can do is freezing. Now, freezing can work for New Zealand mud snail, but needs at least 6 hours to be effective. You can also use heat. Whirling disease can be killed by using nearly boiling water. Just pour it over your gear and allow it to cool. Now, mud snails can also be treated with hot water, putting into a bath of water that's between 120 and 130 degrees for 5 minutes. But don't do this for Gore-Tex. You can cause the material to delaminate. Didymo can also be killed by submersion in hot water, water that's heated to 140 degrees, and expose your equipment for 1 minute. Or if you can get the water to 113 degrees, just make sure that it's submerged and in contact with that water for 20 minutes. The literature also says that aquatic invasive species can be treated with steam. Each area needs to be treated for 3 minutes for a sufficient kill. So it takes a long time, and that equipment isn't very cheap, and it's not always that portable, but it is available. Chlorine is one of the more common chemical methods that we use. Chytrid fungus can be controlled with chlorine using a 5% bleach solution and soaking your gear for 2 minutes. Whirling disease can also be killed with chlorine. You can kill both stages, but they have different prescriptions. To kill the TAM stage would be using 1 part chlorine and 32 parts water, and leaving all your gear in contact with that solution for 10 seconds. But to kill the mature spores, you need a 10% solution, a 50% solution, 1 part chlorine to 1 part water. You dip your waders into a solution of the bleach, or wipe it on or spray it on as a 10% solution. But please make sure that you soak your equipment for 10 minutes. If you're spraying it, let that spray settle on your equipment for a minimum of 10 minutes. Now, there's some other sprays that you can use. Copper sulfate solution can work for New Zealand mud snail, as well as benzethonium chloride. Now, these are substances that you can obtain through aquaculture supply chains. Didymo stomata can also be killed using a 0.12% benzalkonium chloride solution. Excuse me there, tripping over that. So it's not great for your felt soles or neoprene or soft absorbent fabric boots. So I don't think many people are using that one. It's using other agents. Quaternary ammonia is one of the more popular chemicals being used. It works on chytrid fungus, whirling disease, New Zealand mud snail, and Didymo. The rates vary on what you're going to be trying to treat. But let me just let you know up front, some prescriptions call for Quat 128 and some call for Quat 256. Now, the active ingredient is quaternary ammonia, and the numbers there just relate to the dilution factors. So you can use both of these if you just dilute appropriately. But make sure that when you use these, that you clean the gear effectively, because soil can cause this material not to work at all. And cotton will also cause quaternary ammonia to denaturalize. If you're going to decontaminate your boat, make sure that you drain all water from your boat, scrub it down, completely drain the water from the motor. If you let it sit, you could have quagga mussels growing inside your motor. You don't want that. And just make sure that the boat, trailer, and equipment are free from all debris. And have on the work site for your staff and field persons the material safety data sheets for each product, as well as the original label or a copy of the label, the original label, personal protective equipment, a first aid kit, and I do recommend that you have sufficient water for rinsing if you're using chemical agents, as well as portable eye wash. Now, there's lots of regulations covering chemical agents. California Food and Ag, pesticide, protection as the Title 40 protection of the environment. FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodent Act, also apply. The big thing is the labels. If you're going to use one of these chemical agents, the label needs to say that it will work on what you're treating it for. Lots of people sell these products, but they don't register them to treat everything. So you just need to make sure that you are compliant with the laws. And then some of these things may be also considered a drug. So you want to make sure that you take a look and make sure you're using things that are effective and you're doing things appropriately. One of the biggest things that you can start doing right now is just abandoning your felt soles. Felt sole wader boots are just a trap for debris, and within that debris can be aquatic invasive species. A study conducted at Montana State showed that they had 22.10 grams of sediment on average in their wading boots. So you can switch to very effective for wading non-felt soled boots. They're great. Now, some states and a couple foreign countries are already banning or considering bans on felt soles. Earlier this week, there was a vote in New Mexico on whether or not to ban felt-soled boots. In Alaska, they're looking at a statewide moratorium, but already in Southeast Alaska, there will be a ban starting in 2011. New Zealand has also banned felt-soled boots already. Some other things to consider. Use your equipment wisely. Use equipment that's less prone to acquire and transport AIS. Only use the gear that you need to use at a particular site. Okay. You can also choose to use designated gear for dedicated waters. If you're moving around from one body to another and you're doing rapid bioassessments, you may want to get extra head nets. Keep one stick, but that can be wiped down and cleaned with alcohol, but you can take that net off the pole and put that in the freezer and just have a supply to rotate so that you don't have to miss a day working out in the field. Try getting equipment that's easy to clean, and then limit the number of field staff that are coming in contact with your surface waters. That kind of wraps up the presentation. I hope you have some questions for me. These are some of the main websites that you can use to get lots of wonderful information on aquatic invasive species so that you can be a wonderful steward in collecting the data that you need without being a vector.
Right now, everybody is unmuted, and if anybody has a question, please ask.
You can unmute your phones and ask a question, or you can submit them through the chat box.
Are there any questions for Eric?
Well, if you don't have any questions, let me go to one of our sites.
Eric, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Are there any staff or resources available to help our people develop HACCPs? Because, we look at our folks out at the regional water boards or state water board or citizen monitors, and, they don't really have the expertise or the knowledge of what's in their area to really develop a HACCP plan for their sampling. Are there any staff or resources available to help people do that?
Fish and Wildlife Service out of Sacramento did have a staff person that could do some training, and they were able to answer questions. If you just gave them a call, shot them an email, and I believe that position is still funded. If people have questions on developing a HACCP, I don't have much time available, but I could answer questions. The plans are fairly simple, and there's a lot of training online. There's video online that shows you how to go about doing these plans. They're not that difficult and shouldn't take that much time, but the time that needs to go into them once it's done can live beyond just that one season of sampling.
The plans are pretty simple to prepare if you know what organisms are of concern in your area. But how do people like us stay up to date and abreast of the organisms of concern for our area and what water bodies they're located in?
Well, if you go to our web page online, our quick links for these swamp AIS pages, we have AIS queries and reporting. If you click on that, it will take you to many of the sites that I discussed in the presentation where you can query where things already are. But one of the issues is we need to protect the water bodies, and we don't know what's there. So if you are as conservative as possible, then it's not an issue of knowing what's out there. If you consider everything in the world that's coming down the pike, what can I then do with my activities to limit exposure and find that critical control point?